The morning Marcus Mitchell discovered the Hendersons using his pool was a Tuesday in June, and it would be the day that changed everything, though he didn't know it yet. He stood on his back patio with a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching steam rise off the water in the early light. The pool had been a luxury he'd worked 15 years to afford. 15 years of 60-hour weeks at the architectural firm, of declining vacations, of skipping his daughter's soccer games to land clients. The pool was supposed to be the reward, the tangible proof that all those sacrifices meant something. The gate at the far corner of the yard, the one that connected to the Hendersons' property through the thin strip of HOA common ground, was open. Marcus blinked as if the openness of the gate might change if he stared long enough. It didn't. Through it he could see movement, kids splashing, laughter that carried across the shared fence line like an invasion. He set his coffee down on the patio table and walked toward the gate, his bare feet slapping against the concrete. The morning was already hot, the kind of heat that promised a brutal day by noon. In Phoenix, June wasn't a season, it was a siege. When he reached the gate, he could see them clearly. Corinne Henderson, his HOA president and neighbor of 3 years, floating on a lounge chair in his pool. 2 children, hers, he assumed, thrashing around in the deep end. And somehow, impossibly, Corinne's husband, Derek, was grilling something on Marcus's patio. On his patio, the one he just had professionally sealed. "Morning," Derek called out, raising a beer in salute. It was 7:15 a.m. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We figured you wouldn't mind," Corinne said from her float, not bothering to turn around. "Since you're so rarely home anyway, the kids have been cooped up all week, and it's the only pool in the neighborhood without that awful chlorine smell. I told the HOA board we should mandate pool maintenance standards, but nobody listens to me." The lie was so smooth, so casually delivered, that it took Marcus a moment to understand that she wasn't joking. She was serious. She genuinely believed she had some claim to his pool. "You didn't ask," Marcus said. It came out quieter than he intended. Corinne finally turned to look at him, raising her sunglasses onto her forehead. Her eyes were the color of pale blue ice. "We've been neighbors for 3 years, Marcus. I think we can be flexible with these things, especially since Derek and I helped you with the initial landscaping approval. Remember, without our support on the board, you'd still be in permitting hell." "That was my job to handle." "Yes, but we smoothed things over, wrote letters, made calls." She smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I think you owe us a little neighborly cooperation." The children in the pool had stopped splashing. Even they seemed to sense the temperature change in the air. Marcus had spent his entire adult life being reasonable, being the guy who didn't make waves. He'd built his career on compromise, on seeing both sides, on finding solutions that satisfied everyone. It was why he was good at his job. It was also, he was beginning to suspect, why people like Corinne felt comfortable walking into his yard and using his pool like it was a community amenity. "I'd like you to get out," he said, "all of you." Corinne's smile didn't waver. "Marcus, don't be childish." "I'm not being childish, I'm being clear. My pool, my property, off limits." Derek wandered over, beer still in hand, his considerable belly preceding him. He wore board shorts and a tank top that had seen better days. "Look, man, no need to be a prick about it. The kids just want to cool off. It's gonna be 105 today." "That's not my problem." "Really?" Corinne had dismounted her float and was now wadding toward the edge, water cascading off her expensive one-piece. "It's not your problem that children are suffering in this heat. That's interesting, Marcus. Very interesting. I'll have to remember that kind of attitude when we're discussing your backyard expansion next year, because you will need approval for that addition you've been eyeing." There it was, the transaction laid bare, the threat delivered with a smile. Marcus felt something shift inside him. Something that had been wound tight for years began to unlock. "Get out of my pool," he said. Corinne's eyes narrowed. For just a moment, the practiced HOA president mask slipped, and something mean and ugly showed through. Then it was back in place, brighter than before. "Fine," she said, "but you should know that kind of attitude doesn't win friends in a community. Derek, kids, let's go. Marcus apparently prefers to keep his nice things to himself. How very selfish." She said the last word slowly, making sure he understood the implication, that she was cataloging this moment, that there would be consequences. The Hendersons left, trailing water and resentment behind them. Derek muttered something about uptight assholes as he passed. One of the kids, a girl, maybe 9 years old, looked back at the pool with genuine disappointment, and Marcus felt a flicker of doubt. But it passed. He spent the rest of the day replaying the conversation in his head, finding new layers of manipulation each time. The way Karen had framed it as a favor she'd done him. The way she'd implied that his refusal was somehow cruel. The implicit threat about the expansion he'd been planning. A second bedroom suite over the patio for when his aging mother came to stay. She'd weaponized community and kindness, and when he'd defended his own boundary, she'd called him selfish. By evening, Marcus had made a decision. He researched for 3 hours, reading through reviews and specifications. The camera he settled on was top of the line, 4K resolution, night vision, thermal imaging, and most importantly, motorized pan-tilt zoom capability. Artificial intelligence tracking software. The kind of equipment you'd expect to find in a high-security facility, not a residential backyard. He ordered it with next-day delivery, paying extra for the rush. When it arrived on Wednesday, Marcus installed it himself, mounting it on the aluminum post he'd bolted to the corner of his roof. It had a perfect vantage point. It could see every inch of his pool, the surrounding patio, the gate, and even a decent portion of his neighbor's yard. The software installed easily. He named the camera Watchdog in the system log, then sat back to admire his work. By 7:30 that evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Marcus had his answer. The camera automatically detected motion. It tracked, it recorded, and it would hold every moment in crystalline digital detail. He pulled up the footage on his laptop, watching the live feed. The pool glimmered empty and pristine, just as it should be, just as it would be. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt the first cold touch of something else. Something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite rage. It was anticipation. Marcus was at work when it happened. He watched it in real time on his phone, the AI tracking algorithm following Karen and her 2 children as they let themselves in through the gate. The footage was so clear that he could read the labels on the sunscreen bottles they carried. They stayed for 42 minutes, swam, played a game involving floating rings. Karen checked her phone obsessively. Then they left, toweling off and disappearing back through the gate just before Marcus's wife, Jennifer, arrived home from her consulting job. He said nothing to Jennifer about the pool. She would have called it a neighborhood dispute. She would have suggested talking it out. Jennifer believed in the fundamental reasonableness of other people, and Marcus had spent too many years watching that belief get exploited. The next day they came back. This time it was a Saturday and they brought another family, the Martins, who lived 2 houses down. Marcus watched from his office downtown, the laptop screen glowing in the afternoon light, showing him everything. The children doing cannonballs, the adults, all 4 of them, sitting in his lounge chairs, drinking what looked like wine coolers. Karen was gesturing, telling some story. Even through the high-def camera, Marcus could read the shape of her smile. She was enjoying the transgression. That was the thing that stuck with him most. It wasn't desperation that had driven her into his pool. It was entitlement. The casual certainty that rules didn't apply to her. He created a folder on his computer labeled Documentation. He saved every video file. He organized them by date and time. He added notes in a spreadsheet, duration of visits, number of people, times of day, what they did. By the following Wednesday, there were 17 separate incidents recorded. "You seem distracted," Jennifer said that evening, as they sat in bed with their respective phones, not quite making eye contact. "Work project," Marcus said. "Big pitch on Friday." It wasn't entirely a lie. He was pitching something, just not to a client. Jennifer nodded, already scrolling through her email. This was how they existed now, in parallel, orbiting but not quite touching. They'd been married for 8 years, and somewhere along the line, the conversation had stopped being real. They'd moved from communication to logistics. Who's picking up the kids? Do we need to rotate the tires? What time is your mother coming? Marcus wondered if that was what had happened to his relationship with the neighborhood too. When had polite coexistence become an open season for invasion? "I'm going to bed," Jennifer said. "Yeah, okay, I'll be in soon." He waited until she was asleep, then opened his laptop and pulled up the footage from that afternoon. Karen and Derek, alone in the pool. Derek was attempting some kind of swimming stroke that was more thrashing than technique. Karen was sitting on the edge, dangling her legs in the water, talking on her phone. Marcus turned up the volume on his speakers, as low as it would go. Karen's voice came through, tinny but intelligible. And he was absolutely ridiculous about it, Susan. I mean, we were just being neighborly. The kids needed to cool off. But he acted like we were asking him to donate a kidney. People like that, they accumulate things and then become obsessed with protecting them. It's psychological, I think. She paused, listening to whoever. Susan was on the other end of the call. No, I don't feel bad about it at all. He's the type who needs to be reminded that community means something, that we're all supposed to take care of each other. Apparently, Marcus Mitchell didn't get that memo. She laughed. The sound of it came through the speakers, and something twisted inside Marcus's chest. Derek emerged from the pool, and Karen said something to him that Marcus couldn't quite catch. Derek laughed too, that same careless sound. They were mocking him. In his own backyard, on his own property, they were literally laughing at him for defending his own boundary. Marcus closed the laptop. The incident that changed everything happened on a Thursday. Marcus was home early that day. Client meeting had been rescheduled, and he heard the gate open around 2 in the afternoon. He was in his home office, but he pulled up the live feed on his monitor anyway. What he saw made him stand up. There were 6 people in the pool, not just the Hendersons, but the Martins and 2 people he didn't recognize, kids and adults mixed together. The cooler, his cooler from his patio storage, was open on the deck, and someone had strung up lights. Actual string lights, as if they were throwing a casual garden party. At his house, Marcus felt his heart rate spike. This wasn't casual trespassing anymore. This was occupation. This was a statement: we can do whatever we want here, and there's nothing you can do about it. He went downstairs and walked out to the patio. They didn't see him at first. Karen was in the pool, playing some game with the children. She looked genuinely happy. The kind of happy that made her forget to maintain her HOA president posture. "Excuse me," Marcus said. Everyone stopped. The water went still. All eyes turned toward him. "This is a private party?" he asked quietly. Karen's expression shifted from joy to something sharper, calculation flickering behind her eyes. "Just a few neighbors," she said. "Cooling off on a hot day. You should join us, Marcus. Don't be antisocial." "You're trespassing." "That's a harsh word for neighbors hanging out," one of the women Marcus didn't recognize said. She had a wine cooler in her hand and the confidence of someone used to not being told no. "We're not exactly strangers." "You're on my property without permission. That's the definition of trespassing." Derek emerged from the pool, water dripping from his shoulders. He was smiling, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Or we could look at it as you being a guy who has something the whole neighborhood wants to share in. Seems petty to keep it to yourself." "It's not petty, it's mine." "Technically," Karen said, wadding toward the edge with that practiced smile back in place. "The HOA guidelines for community amenities state that shared spaces should be available to all residents during daylight hours, provided they..." "This isn't a shared space. This is my private pool in my private yard on my private property." "Actually," Karen interrupted, pulling herself up onto the pool edge with practiced grace, water cascading off her. "There's some gray area there, especially regarding the easement for the common ground that borders your property. The HOA board has been discussing whether that extends to certain recreational amenities. I think it's an interesting legal question, don't you?" She said it with a smile, but what she was actually saying was clear. "I can make this difficult. I can tie you up in legal proceedings. I can turn your own community against you." Marcus looked at all of them, these people he'd nodded to in the street, whose holiday cards sat on his mantle, who he'd paid HOA dues to live among. They looked like they belonged there, like the pool was already theirs. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "Now." "Or what?" Derek's smile widened. "You gonna call the cops on your neighbors, man? That's gonna go over real well." Marcus didn't respond. He turned and walked back into his house. Behind him, he heard Karen laugh. "I told you," she said to the others. "That's exactly the kind of attitude I'm talking about. Come on, the water's perfect." They were back in the pool before Marcus reached his office. He sat at his desk, hands shaking, and watched the live feed. They stayed for 3 more hours. They drank his cooler dry. One of the kids, not Karen's, used his premium outdoor shower, wrapped in one of his Turkish bath towels that Jennifer had ordered from that expensive place in Italy. At the bottom of his screen, The recording time counter ticked steadily forward, capturing every second of the invasion. When they finally left, Karen paused at the gate and looked directly up at the camera, the first time she'd acknowledged its existence. She raised her hand, not in a wave, but in something that looked more like a salute, an acknowledgement, a challenge. "I see you watching, and I don't care." That night, Marcus went through every minute of footage. He cataloged every face. He noted every act of casual destruction, a child dragging his feet through the plants, someone using his exterior wall to dry off, leaving dark streaks, trash left in the corner that would later blow into his neighbors' yards. He created a folder on his laptop called Evidence. He organized it by incident. He typed up detailed descriptions of each trespass, noting times and dates and participants. Jennifer found him at 3 a.m., still at his desk. "What are you doing?" she asked, concern in her voice. Real concern, the kind she hadn't directed at him in months. "Documenting," he said. "Documenting what?" He didn't answer. He just minimized the window and closed the laptop. There was no way to explain this that wouldn't make him sound like the problem. But the next morning, when he was alone in the house, Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He forwarded all of his footage to the HOA board, every video file, every timestamp, every humiliating moment of his neighbors treating his property like a public beach. He included a message: "I'm documenting ongoing trespass. Per HOA Guidelines Section 4.2, I'm formally requesting action. If this continues, I'll pursue legal remedies." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he sat back in his chair and waited for the response. The response came faster than he expected. Karen called him within an hour, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "Why are you sending security footage to the board?" "Documenting evidence of trespass." "Evidence? Marcus, those are home videos of neighbors being friendly. You're going to look absolutely insane if you try to use these as legal evidence of what? Us being neighborly. You've been using my pool repeatedly without permission." "Oh my God." Karen's voice shifted into something that sounded almost like pity. "You've really lost perspective on what community means, haven't you? We were just trying to be kind to you, to help you understand that there's more to life than accumulating things and keeping score." "My pool, my rules." "Your pool, your isolation, you mean?" She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something dangerous and quiet. "This is going to look very bad, Marcus. Sending footage of families to the HOA board? A lot of people are going to think that's paranoid, obsessive even. Do you really want that reputation in this community?" The threat was implied but unmistakable. She was going to spin this. She was going to make him the villain of the story. "I don't care what people think," Marcus said. "Stay off my property." He hung up. By that evening, the first sympathetic text came in from a woman 3 houses down. "Just heard what happened. We're so sorry about the Karen situation. She can be a lot." By the next morning, there were 17 texts in a neighborhood group chat that Marcus had forgotten he was part of. The messages started with support but gradually shifted. "Maybe we should all be able to use the pool. I mean, it is next to common ground. My kids saw them swimming. Now they ask why they can't cool off too. This is awkward. Has anyone considered that Marcus might be the problem here?" By the end of the day, there was a new post from Karen on the neighborhood Facebook page. "Some people forget that community is about generosity. That neighbor used to mean something. It's sad when material possessions become more important than the well-being of our collective families." She didn't mention Marcus by name. She didn't have to. The comments rolled in, each one another small cut. "So true, that's a toxic attitude. Honestly, just let them use the pool. What's the harm?" This is why HOAs exist, to keep people like that in check. Marcus read the thread at midnight, unable to stop himself, watching as his violation of his own boundaries was reframed as a character flaw, a failure of community spirit, a kind of selfishness that marked him as someone dangerous to be around. He had tried to defend himself by documenting the truth, and somehow the truth had become the weapon used against him. The camera continued to record, every moment, every frame. And somewhere in those recordings, Marcus began to understand that simply catching evidence wasn't going to be enough. Evidence could be spun. Evidence could be reframed. Evidence could be made to look like obsession. He needed something more. He needed to understand them. The next week, Marcus stopped going to work. He told his boss there was a family emergency. His boss, accustomed to Marcus's reliability, didn't question it. He simply switched his projects to other architects and assured Marcus they'd handle things while he took the time he needed. What he needed was time and information. Marcus transformed his home office into something that resembled a low-level surveillance operation. He had already installed the camera with the tracking software, but now he added more. Motion sensors around the perimeter of his yard, acoustic monitoring on the shared gate, a second camera that captured the approach to his property from the street. He created a database. He input every person who had ever used his pool without permission. He researched them through public records, social media, neighborhood websites. He created files with their addresses, employment information, family status. He documented their patterns of behavior in his yard. For Karen, the file was the thickest. Karen Henderson, 47, worked as a part-time consultant for an HOA management company. She'd been president of their neighborhood association for 5 years. Before that, she'd served on the planning board for the city. She had a degree in communications from a state school. She was married to Derek, 49, a commercial real estate agent who'd been flagged by the Better Business Bureau twice for shoddy property inspections. Their children were Emma, 12, and Tyler, 9. Emma was involved in competitive swimming. Tyler had been suspended from school twice for behavioral issues. Karen posted on the neighborhood Facebook page approximately 47 times per month. She was active on the HOA email listserv. She attended city council meetings. She was, in short, the kind of person who believed that visibility equaled power. What fascinated Marcus was the contradiction. Karen presented herself as a community organizer, a leader, someone who cared about collective well-being. But her social media told a different story. Photos of expensive vacations, bragging about renovations, constant status updates about acquiring new things, the luxury kitchen remodel, the Tesla, the pool memberships at the country club that apparently hadn't been enough anymore. The photos from his pool showed a different Karen, relaxed, happy, as if the pool had been something she'd been craving not because it was nice but because it was his. On the 8th day of his self-imposed surveillance leave, Marcus discovered something interesting in the public records database. The Hendersons had refinanced their mortgage 4 times in 6 years. Their credit score had taken a steep dive recently. Marcus found a judgment against them in the county records. Someone had sued Derek over a failed real estate deal. Money problems, real money problems, not just the normal constraints of middle-class life. Marcus cross-referenced this with Karen's social media and noticed something he'd missed before. The photos and posts had escalated in frequency. The vacations had gotten flashier. The boasts about renovations more insistent. It was overcompensation. It was the behavior of someone trying to maintain an image while the foundation was cracking underneath. That evening, Jennifer came home to find Marcus still in his office. Maps and printouts and database screenshots covering every available surface. "What is this?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that sounded like concern mixed with horror. "Research," Marcus said. "On what?" "The neighborhood situation." Jennifer stepped back from the desk, and Marcus saw the moment something shifted in how she was looking at him. "Marcus, this is insane. Look at this. You've created some kind of surveillance database on your neighbors." "I'm documenting a pattern of behavior." "You're obsessing." Jennifer sat on the edge of his desk, and her voice softened in that way that made it worse. "This isn't like you. You need to stop. You need to talk to someone, a therapist maybe." "I'm not crazy." "I didn't say you were, but this," she gestured at the walls, "this looks like you're unraveling." "They won't stop using my pool, Jennifer. They'll keep escalating until I make them understand that there are consequences." "Consequences?" Jennifer's voice rose. "What are you planning to do exactly? Because right now this looks like you're building a case against your neighbors for what? Having fun." "Trespassing." "They're using a pool, Marcus. They're not robbing a bank. And meanwhile, you've turned yourself into someone who monitors them constantly, who creates databases on their personal lives, who sits here at night looking like." She trailed off, but the implication was clear, like a madman. "Would you rather I just let them keep doing it?" "I'd rather you remember that we live in a community, that sometimes you have to be flexible, that not everything is worth this level of, she stopped herself. You need to talk to someone, a professional. She left the room, and Marcus heard her phone light up a few minutes later, presumably with texts to her sister or her mother, checking on him, worried about his mental state. But Jennifer didn't understand. Nobody understood. The violation wasn't about the pool. It was about the way Karen had looked at him when she'd made her threat about the expansion. It was about the way she'd treated his refusal to be exploited as a personal attack on the community. It was about the systematic way she was turning everyone against him. The next morning, Marcus decided to follow Karen. He left his house at 7:45 a.m., staying 3 cars back as her white SUV pulled out of her driveway. He followed her to a Starbucks drive-thru where she ordered a complicated-sounding drink. Then to the HOA management office where she spent 3 hours. He sat in the parking lot, camera trained on the entrance, recording her arrival and departure. She came out with a folder and a worried expression. Then to City Hall. She met with someone in an official-looking badge, and they walked together to a nearby cafe. Marcus positioned himself where he could see them through the window. They were serious, intent. Karen was gesturing emphatically about something. At lunch, Marcus looked up the name on the badge through the city website. Jennifer Kim, Planning and Zoning Director. By 2 p.m., he was back at Karen's house. She went inside and didn't emerge again until 5:30 when she left for what appeared to be a dinner with her family. Marcus drove home, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind racing. Why would Karen be meeting with the Planning and Zoning Director? What was she planning? It took him until late that evening to find the answer. He searched for any recent applications to his address in the city planning database. It took 3 tries with different search parameters, but finally. Application filed. Variance request for adjacent property line adjustment. Filed by Karen Henderson on behalf of the Henderson property. Submitted to City Planning and Zoning Department. Details. Request for 1-foot easement adjustment on the shared property line between 4742 Ridgemont Drive and 4740 Ridgemont Drive to allow for planned expansion of the Henderson residence. His address was 4742 Ridgemont Drive. Marcus read it 3 times to make sure he understood. Karen wasn't just using his pool. She was trying to take a foot of his property, a foot that could be used to justify the easement claim she'd made about recreational amenities, a foot that would technically put the community ground closer to his pool. She was actually trying to steal from him. And she was doing it methodically, legally. She was working the system that she, as HOA president, helped oversee. Marcus felt something crystallize inside him. This wasn't playground bullying anymore. This was a campaign. This was systematic. He went back through his footage with new eyes. Every use of his pool now looked like reconnaissance. Like she was scoping it out for her expansion plan. Like she was softening him up, testing his boundaries, seeing how far she could push before he broke. He spent the next 3 days documenting everything. He compiled the surveillance footage. He added his photos of the variance application. He created a timeline that showed how every action Karen had taken, the casual pool use, the community pressure, the Facebook posts, had coincided with her planning her expansion. It was brilliant, actually. While Marcus was distracted defending his pool, she was moving forward with the actual land grab. On day 4, Marcus decided it was time to make his move. He called the planning department and requested a formal meeting with Jennifer Kim about the variance application. When she asked what the objection was, Marcus simply said he had documentation of a conflict of interest. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. That night, Marcus finally slept. For the first time in 2 weeks, he slept without anxiety churning in his stomach, because now he had a plan, now he had actual leverage. Karen had made a mistake. She'd assumed that Marcus would remain passive, that he would accept the reframing of his own victimization as selfishness. She'd assumed wrong. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because even his sophisticated surveillance system couldn't quite reach that far, was that Karen was already planning her countermove. She was, at that very moment, sitting across from a lawyer's desk, discussing what she had discovered when she'd done a background check on Marcus Mitchell. She was preparing her own documentation, and the information she had found was far more damaging than a camera installation or a spreadsheet of pool use times. The planning meeting took place in a sterile conference room on the third floor of City Hall. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, a folder of documents under his arm and his laptop prepared for his presentation. Jennifer Kim was professional and polite. She poured him coffee from a carafe and asked if he needed anything before they began. "I'm here to object to the variance request filed by Corinne Henderson," Marcus said. "I believe there's a conflict of interest that should disqualify it." Jennifer pulled up the application on her screen. "Okay, walk me through your concern." Corinne Henderson is the president of our HOA board. She's also been engaged in ongoing harassment of my property, specifically repeated trespass on my private pool. The variance she's requesting would benefit her property at the expense of mine, and I believe she's leveraging her position on the board to pressure the community into supporting her application. It sounded reasonable when he said it out loud, almost clinical. Jennifer listened, nodding, and then she did something that made Marcus's stomach sink. She glanced toward the door as if checking something before she spoke. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm glad you brought this to my attention, because there are actually some other issues we need to discuss regarding your property." "Other issues?" "Yes," Jennifer turned her computer monitor slightly so they could both see the screen. "I've been contacted by an attorney representing Corinne Henderson. The contact was made yesterday, and it includes allegations I think we need to address." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "What allegations?" "According to their claim, you've been operating an unauthorized surveillance system that captures video feed of the Henderson property, their children, and potentially other residents' homes. They're alleging that this surveillance is invasive, potentially illegal, and that it violates multiple privacy laws." "That's ridiculous. The camera is on my property, facing my pool." "Is it?" Jennifer clicked to another file on her screen. Marcus saw a still image from one of his camera feeds. A high-res capture showing the Henderson yard, the corner of their patio, and Emma Henderson in her swimsuit, barely visible at the edge of the frame. It was from one of his clips. "Where did you get that?" Marcus asked. Corinne Henderson's attorney provided it as evidence of the surveillance violation. They also provided your filing with the HOA board, your submission of security footage, which they're now claiming was an attempt at blackmail. They're asserting that you threatened to release footage of their children to pressure them into ceasing their legitimate use of community resources. "That's not what happened. According to their claim, you demanded they stop using the pool or face legal action, and backed up that demand with the threat of releasing recordings of their family. Is that accurate?" "No, Marcus stopped. He could see how it looked. He could see exactly how it looked. "I was documenting trespass while recording their children without consent, in a state where audio recording requires all-party consent, I might add. This is actually quite serious, Mr. Mitchell." Jennifer pulled up yet another file. This one made Marcus's breath catch. It was a screenshot from his personal laptop. A file labeled Henderson Research, containing all the demographic information he'd compiled. The credit score data, the mortgage refinancing records, the lawsuit. "How did they?" "Your system was accessed by an outside party. The Hendersons' IT consultant identified a vulnerability and was able to retrieve these files. Their attorney is now claiming that you've been engaged in systematic harassment, surveillance, and harassment through the compilation of private financial and personal information." "They hacked me," Marcus said, his voice sounding strange and distant to his own ears. "Perhaps someone had access to your password. The point is, the evidence suggests that you're the one engaging in invasive behavior, not Corinne Henderson. And frankly, what you've done, installing surveillance that captures private residences without consent, compiling personal financial information on your neighbors, threatening them with legal action. This is far more serious than unauthorized pool use." Marcus felt the room tilting. He'd been so focused on documenting Corinne's violations that he hadn't considered how his own documentation could be weaponized. He hadn't thought about how surveillance footage that was legal on his property could look absolutely dystopian when extracted and presented to government officials. "I want to make clear," Jennifer said, her voice taking on an official tone, "that this office is not taking any position on your neighborhood dispute. That's a civil matter between you and your neighbors. But the surveillance issue and the compilation of private financial information, those are different matters. Those could potentially cross into harassment or stalking. I'd recommend you consult with an attorney before taking any further action. The meeting was over. It was over, and Marcus had walked in expecting to derail Corinne's plans, and instead he'd found himself defenseless against her counterstrike. He drove home in a daze, the folder of documents still in the passenger seat utterly useless. Jennifer was waiting for him when he got to the house. She was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, and when she looked up at him, he could see that she'd been crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, though something in his gut already knew. "My mother called me," Jennifer said quietly. "She wanted to know if we were okay, if you were okay. She said she'd heard rumors about you, something about you stalking our neighbors." "That's not." "It gets worse. She said she heard it from her book club, which means everyone at the book club knows, which means everyone in the neighborhood knows." "Jennifer, I can explain." "Can you?" She stood up, and her voice had an edge he'd never heard before. "Can you explain why my husband is apparently creating databases on neighbors? Why you're installing secret cameras? Why you're compiling personal financial information on people we live near?" "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Marcus? Because I just got a very concerning call from a lawyer representing Corinne Henderson. She's considering pressing charges against you for harassment and surveillance. She wanted to give me a heads up out of professional courtesy, out of neighborly concern." The last phrase was said with bitter irony. "She hacked my computer," Marcus said. "She stole my files." "And now you look paranoid," Jennifer said flatly. "That's what she wanted. She wanted you to create all this evidence of your own instability, and you did. You played right into it." "I was defending my property." "No," Jennifer said, and her voice broke slightly. "No, you were escalating, and in doing so you made yourself look like a madman who monitors his neighbors and compiles dossiers on their lives." She grabbed her car keys from the counter. "Where are you going?" "To my mother's house. I need to think. I need to understand whether I'm married to someone I actually know or whether I missed signs that something was very wrong with you." "Jennifer, wait." But she was already leaving. The door closed behind her, and Marcus heard the car start and the sound of her driving away. He sat on the couch where she'd been sitting, and for a long moment he couldn't move. His phone buzzed with a text notification. It was from the neighborhood group chat. "Just want to let everyone know that the situation with our HOA president has been resolved positively. Corinne has graciously decided not to press charges against our neighbor in light of a commitment to community mediation and professional help. Let's all be kind to those struggling with mental health issues." The text was from a name Marcus didn't recognize. A reply came almost immediately. "So glad this is being handled with compassion. Our community is stronger when we support each other through difficult times." Another reply. "Really makes you think about how one person's struggles can affect the whole neighborhood. Hope Marcus gets the help he needs." Marcus set his phone down and didn't open it again. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from Corinne's attorney. In it, the following points were addressed. Installation of surveillance equipment that captures the Henderson family without consent. Compilation of private financial information obtained without authorization. Sharing of surveillance footage with the HOA board to pressure the Henderson family into ceasing the use of community property. Threats of legal action followed by the release of private information, characterized as potential blackmail. Accessing and sharing of sensitive personal data, including bankruptcy and legal judgment information. The letter requested that Marcus cease all surveillance, cease all contact with the Henderson family, and agree to a financial settlement of $15,000 to cover emotional distress and invasion of privacy. The letter concluded with a warning. If Marcus did not comply within 10 days, formal charges would be filed. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Each time the words seemed to shift and distort slightly, taking on meanings he hadn't intended. He had been trying to protect himself. Instead, he had created a paper trail of his own obsession. He had been trying to expose them. Instead, he had exposed himself. The response to Corinne's attack came not from Marcus but from the internet. That evening, someone posted on the neighborhood Facebook page a screenshot of Corinne's public comments about Marcus combined with documentation of the variance application. The post was titled, "Who is the Real Bully?" It argued that Karen had been engaged in consistent pressure tactics and environmental harassment, and that Marcus's surveillance was a proportionate response to escalating invasion of privacy. It included a link to a crowdfunding page that had been set up to help Marcus with legal fees. The comments exploded. Some people sided with Marcus, others sided with Karen. The neighborhood split into factions. Previously cordial neighbors began arguing in the comment section. The HOA board issued a statement calling for calm. Karen posted a tearful update claiming that the online attack was causing her family emotional harm. Within 48 hours, a second attorney sent Marcus a cease and desist regarding the online harassment. The crowdfunding page was taken down by the platform itself. The local news picked it up as a feel-good story about community discord, interviewing Karen at her home where she discussed the impact of harassment on families. She did not mention the variance application. She did not mention the trespassing. She spoke only about a neighbor's obsession and how it had affected her children's sense of safety. The segment ran with the headline, "When NEIGHBORS become ENEMIES." In the background of the news segment, Marcus's security camera could be seen peeking over the fence line. The shot was framed in a way that made it look like the surveillance equipment of a paranoid man, not a person protecting his own property. By the end of the week, Marcus had received 3 calls from people interested in buying his house. They all mentioned they were getting a great rate because the neighborhood situation meant the property was being priced competitively. His market value had dropped $30,000. Jennifer did not come home. Instead, her attorney called and left a voicemail about scheduling a consultation for a divorce filing. The variance application for the Henderson property was quietly approved by the city planning board. And through it all, Marcus's cameras kept recording. They captured everything, every moment of his own undoing. Marcus stopped leaving his house 2 weeks after Jennifer's departure. He'd taken another leave from work, this time with an explicit statement that they should not expect him back without further notice. His boss, who'd been sympathetic during the family emergency, was now less inclined toward patience. There were hints in the email about termination for cause if Marcus didn't provide a timeline for his return. Marcus deleted the email without responding. The house felt different without Jennifer. Colder somehow, even though it was now mid-July, and the exterior temperature regularly climbed past 115 degrees. He kept the air conditioning turned down to 68 degrees. The utility bill was going to be astronomical. He'd already received notice that the water utility company was investigating his account because of the multiple refilling of his pool. They suspected a leak. Marcus hadn't bothered to correct them. The camera system continued its relentless recording. Marcus had connected it to his laptop and had set it to display the footage on one of his monitors on a rotating loop. Every 8 hours, it cycled through a new section of his property: the pool, the gate, the back patio, the approach from the street. His yard was perfect, empty and pristine and absolutely silent. No one had dared to use his pool since the news segment aired. Marcus spent his days in a kind of suspended animation. He would wake up around 7 a.m., make coffee that he wouldn't finish, and sit in his office watching the footage. He'd check his email obsessively, refreshing every 5 minutes to see if there were any new messages from Jennifer's attorney. There were usually 3 to 5 new legal documents arriving each day: discovery motions, asset statements, requests for information about his employment status and income. Jennifer's attorney was efficient, ruthless. The divorce filing claimed irreconcilable differences and cited a specific incident: Marcus's obsessive surveillance and harassment of private citizens, which had allegedly caused Jennifer significant emotional distress and necessitated her removal from the family home. Marcus's own attorney, an expensive IP lawyer who specialized in technology disputes, had been surprisingly candid during their consultation. "We can fight this divorce all the way, but given the publicity, it's going to be expensive and you're likely to lose custody of your daughter anyway. Judges don't like people who install surveillance systems to obsess over neighbors. Makes them nervous." Marcus didn't have a daughter. He and Jennifer had never had children, but the attorney had been talking theoretically about the implications of his behavior. The letter from the HOA board came on a Tuesday, when the heat was so intense that the asphalt on the street outside had begun to crack and warp. The letter informed Marcus that he was being charged with a violation of the HOA code regarding harassment and intimidation of other residents. They'd scheduled an enforcement hearing for 2 weeks out, and they were requesting that he attend to answer the charges. There was an attachment, a formal complaint filed by Karen Henderson, supported by 37 signatures from other neighborhood residents. 37 people. Out of approximately 200 households in the neighborhood, 37 people had signed a petition saying that Marcus was a problem. The irony, the impossible, devastating irony, was that Marcus had been right. Karen had been using his pool. Karen had been trespassing. Karen had been planning the variance application specifically to put pressure on his property. He was not wrong about what she'd done. But it didn't matter, because the moment he'd installed the surveillance system to document her trespass, he'd handed her the weapon she needed to destroy him. It was, Marcus began to think in his darker moments, genius. She'd counted on exactly this response. She'd known that a reasonable person would react to invasion by documenting it. She'd known that surveillance, properly framed, would make him look unstable. She'd been right. On the day of the HOA hearing, Marcus put on a suit, the first time he'd worn one since being asked to leave work. His appearance had degraded in the 2 weeks since Jennifer left. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His face had taken on a gaunt, slightly feverish appearance. His eyes had developed a tendency to dart around the room, never settling. The hearing was held in the recreation center, in a room that typically hosted yoga classes and book clubs. 17 members of the HOA board were present, sitting behind a table that had been arranged in a vague attempt at formality. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by her attorney and, inexplicably, Derek. Their children were not present, which struck Marcus as a calculated choice. The vulnerable children had served their purpose. Now they were safely removed from view. The board chairman, a man named Robert Thornton, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 12 years and whom Marcus had exchanged Christmas cards with, called the meeting to order. "We're here regarding formal complaints filed against Marcus Mitchell, 4742 Ridgemont Drive, by Karen Henderson and supported by 37 additional residents. The charges are harassment, intimidation, and violation of our community standards regarding neighbor relations. Mr. Mitchell, you have the right to respond to these charges. Do you understand?" "I understand," Marcus said, "but I want to be clear. The surveillance system I installed is on my property. It records my property. Any capture of neighboring properties is incidental and unintentional." "The point," the board chairman said quietly, "is not the legality of the surveillance. The point is the impact on the community." "What impact? I have a right to monitor my own property." "And the community has a right to feel safe," Karen said suddenly, standing up though she'd been given no indication she should speak. "I want Marcus to understand something. We could have pressed charges against him months ago when this started. We could have involved the police and made his life very difficult. But the truth is, I never wanted it to come to this. I've been hoping he would get help." It was a masterful performance. She was the victim who'd exercised restraint. She was the person who was actually concerned for Marcus's well-being. "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, hearing the tremor in his own voice. "I documented trespass." "You documented my family," Karen said quietly. "You took information about our lives, about our financial situation, and you compiled it. You watched us. You orchestrated a campaign to destroy my reputation." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Because I have correspondence from you to the planning department specifically designed to make me look bad. I have screenshots of you discussing me with other residents online. I have emails where you advocated for the HOA board to take action against me." "You trespassed on my property?" The words came out louder than Marcus had intended, his voice rising in a way that made everyone in the room shift back slightly. "I swam in a pool," Karen said, her voice never raising, which somehow made it more powerful. "You surveilled my children. I think we know who the victim is here." The board voted 15-2 to impose sanctions. Marcus was ordered to dismantle the surveillance system, submit to a community mediation program, refrain from any further documentation or recording of other residents, submit to a wellness check by a professional mediator to ensure he was not a threat to the community. The sanctions would remain in place for 2 years. At the end of that period, they could be reviewed if Marcus demonstrated compliance and evidence of mental health improvement. It was a conviction without a trial, a judgment of insanity masked in bureaucratic language. When Marcus tried to speak, to say something, anything in his own defense, the board chairman simply said, "I think we're done here." The meeting adjourned. People filed out. Some of them avoided Marcus's eyes. Others looked at him with something that might have been pity. Outside, in the brutal July heat, Marcus stood on the concrete and felt something shift inside him. A clarity that cut through the fog that had been accumulating in his mind for weeks. He'd been wrong, not about what Karen had done, that part was correct. She had trespassed. She had planned the variance application. She had methodically worked to get him to overreact, which he'd done exactly on schedule. But he'd been wrong about something more fundamental. He'd believed that the truth would matter, that documentation would matter, that if he could just prove what happened, justice would follow. Instead, he'd learned that narrative mattered more than truth. Perception mattered more than reality. And a person who was willing to be shameless, who was willing to present themselves as victim even while victimizing others, would always win against someone trying to play by the rules. Marcus walked back to his car, the one that was parked in his own driveway where he felt too watched to actually drive it most days, and sat in the driver's seat with the door open, letting the heat of the car bake into his already fevered body. His phone buzzed with a text notification. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "This is to inform you that as of 6 p.m. tonight, the City of Phoenix Planning Department has officially rescinded your residential expansion permit application, pending a reassessment due to recent property line dispute proceedings." The expansion, the addition for his mother, that was gone too. Everything was gone. That evening, Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He went to his office, logged into his computer, and deleted every file. The surveillance footage, the documentation, the research database, the spreadsheets and timelines and evidence. All of it deleted to the recycle bin, then emptied. Then he went outside with a sledgehammer. Where had he acquired a sledgehammer? He must have purchased it at some point during the previous weeks, though he couldn't remember, and he smashed the camera installation on his roof. It took 3 swings. On the 4th swing, the sledgehammer hit the roof tile and cracked it. He didn't care. He kept swinging until the camera was a twisted nest of circuitry and metal. By the time he was finished, he was drenched in sweat, and his hands were bleeding from where the hammer handle had rubbed them raw. He set the sledgehammer down on the patio next to the pool. Then he sat on the edge of the pool and looked at the water. It was so clean, so perfectly blue. He'd had it cleaned and rebalanced twice since the last unauthorized use, maintaining it obsessively. Nobody would use it now. Nobody would ever be allowed to use it, because now they knew that his possession of it was so fragile, so desperately important to him, that he would destroy himself rather than share it. He'd wanted to protect his boundary. Instead, he'd built a wall so tall that nobody could get in. Or more accurately, he'd let Karen convince him that the boundary was so important that the only way to protect it was to become the kind of person who deserved to be punished for doing so. On the morning of his 47th birthday, a date that passed without Jennifer mentioning it, though she'd always made a big production of birthdays in the past, Marcus received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. It was Jennifer's attorney. She informed him that Jennifer was requesting a rapid finalization of their divorce proceedings. The house would be sold. They would split the proceeds 50-50 after the sale and after paying off the attorney fees. Jennifer was requesting that the house listing price be set at the market rate despite recent depreciation, which meant they would lose money on the sale. They would lose money because of him. "She also wants you to know," the attorney said, her voice carefully neutral, "that she's willing to move forward without contesting your response if you agree to the terms." It was a mercy, an offer to end this without additional pain. "Okay," Marcus said. "I'll email you the documents for your signature." The real estate agent put a sign up in the yard within 48 hours. The first showing was by Karen and Derek, who came to look at the property on a Saturday morning. Marcus watched from his bedroom window as they walked around the exterior of the house. Karen pointed at the garden. Derek looked at the pool, and even from a distance, Marcus could see him smiling. They didn't try to hide it. They didn't pretend they were seriously considering buying the property. They simply wanted to see it, to walk through it. to experience the space that had so nearly become a symbol of their dominance, a victory made concrete. The showing lasted 45 minutes. After they left, Marcus went downstairs and sat on the edge of his pool for a long time, looking at nothing. 3 weeks before the house was scheduled to close, there was a single leak in the Hendersons' foundation. It started as nothing, just a small seep of water in their basement. Derek called a contractor, who informed him that the seep was likely caused by a recent shift in the foundation, probably initiated by the recent expansion work they'd had done on their property. The expansion that had required the variance application. The expansion that had taken 1 foot from the common ground adjacent to Marcus's property. The contractor recommended a full foundation inspection. This inspection revealed something troubling. The foundation was settling unevenly. There were hairline fractures in the concrete slab. The cause, the contractor theorized, might be a shift in the soil composition or a previously undiscovered geological instability. Or it could be related to the property line adjustment and the construction work that had followed it. The repair estimate came in at $47,000. Then came worse news. The city's planning department, conducting a secondary review of the variance application as a result of Marcus's dispute, even though the variance had been approved and implemented, discovered an error in the original survey work. The surveyor who'd done the work had not accounted for a historical easement that had been filed in 1984, but never updated in the digital records. That easement meant that the 1 foot of property that the Hendersons had acquired through the variance did not, in fact, belong to them. The city had approved the expansion based on faulty survey data. The city issued an order that the Hendersons must either remove the expansion or immediately acquire a new variance that would require additional public hearings and permit modifications. The Hendersons had already put $80,000 into the expansion. The HOA board was informed of the situation and, in an emergency session, held a meeting to determine their liability. They ultimately decided to require Karen, as HOA president, to abstain from the vote, and they voted 11-6 to fine her $15,000 for pursuing a variance application that had resulted in legal complications for the association. It was a political execution. Her own board had turned on her. But it got worse. The news of the survey error and the subsequent foundation problems made local news. HOA president's expansion fails due to survey error, the headline read. The article mentioned, in passing, that the expansion had been objected to by a resident who had alleged a conflict of interest due to ongoing neighborhood disputes. Marcus Mitchell wasn't named in the article. He didn't have to be. The internet found him anyway. Within hours, someone had aggregated all the information. The news articles about the failed expansion, the social media posts from the neighborhood dispute, the viral coverage of the HOA president versus the paranoid neighbor. But now the narrative had shifted. Now people were asking questions. If Marcus had been right about the conflict of interest, what else had he been right about? The thread that emerged was initially a basic summary of the events, but it quickly evolved into something more complex. On Reddit, someone posted to the R Justice Served subreddit. Woman abuses HOA position while harassing neighbor, gets caught. The thread had 47,000 upvotes before it was locked. The comments were brutal, not toward Marcus anymore, but toward Karen. People who'd seen only the news segment about neighbors becoming enemies now went back and researched the full story. They found screenshots of Karen's posts where she'd characterized Marcus as unstable. They compared these posts to the timeline of her property expansion plans. The consensus emerged slowly, then all at once. Karen had deliberately provoked Marcus, had counted on him documenting the provocation, and then had used that documentation as evidence of his instability, all while pursuing a property expansion based on a faulty survey. One comment, which was gilded multiple times, read, "She weaponized the concept of community mental health concerns to cover up her own fraud. She's the villain of this story, not him." Karen deleted her social media accounts by the end of the week. By the week after, the neighbors who'd signed the petition against Marcus began calling him directly, apologizing. They hadn't known the full story. They'd been manipulated just like he had been. The HOA board issued a formal apology to Marcus, offering to reverse the sanctions they'd voted on. But Marcus didn't respond to any of it. He remained in his house, moving through the closing procedures with Jennifer's attorney, not contacting anyone. He had no desire to be vindicated by the court of public opinion, not after being condemned by it. What surprised him was a phone call he received on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month after the news about the Henderson Foundation problems broke. It was Corinne. "Marcus," her voice was so small that he barely recognized it. "Can we talk?" He almost hung up, but something made him wait. "I want to apologize," she said. "For everything. I was wrong. I was out of control, and I used you as a target for my own frustration." Marcus waited. He didn't respond because he wasn't sure what he felt. "The expansion was supposed to solve our financial problems," Corinne continued, her voice cracking. "Derek had lost his real estate license due to the lawsuit. We were behind on our mortgage. We were behind on everything. And I thought if we could just expand the house, we could refinance or sell for more money and get ourselves out of the hole. It felt like the only way out." "So you took it from me," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I wanted to ask if there's any way, if you'd be willing to talk to the city about dropping the charges against us." "There are no charges against you," Marcus said. "I never pressed charges." "But you disputed the variance. You're the reason they're investigating the expansion now." "I disputed a conflict of interest in the application process. That's all." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "My children are asking why we have to leave the neighborhood," Corinne said finally. "They want to understand what happened, and I don't know how to explain that their mother sabotaged a neighbor and then got caught." Marcus thought about Emma Henderson in her competitive swimming suit, splashing in his pool. About Tyler Henderson doing cannonballs without any sense that he was trespassing. "They can stay," he heard himself say. "What?" "Your children, they can still live there. It's not their fault." Corinne's breathing became audible on the other end of the line. "Why would you say that?" "Because I became as bad as you were," Marcus said. "I installed surveillance to follow you. I compiled information on your family. I watched all of you without your knowledge or consent. And I did it because you violated my boundary. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that proportionality matters. I forgot that just because you were wrong doesn't mean my response was right." "Marcus, I don't understand." "I'm selling my house," he said. "Jennifer and I are divorcing. I'm leaving the neighborhood. So it doesn't matter whether you stay or whether you go. But your children deserve to live somewhere without knowing that they're hated. That's all I'm saying." He hung up after that. The house closed on schedule. The real estate agent handled most of the logistics. Jennifer had already moved into an apartment closer to her consulting work. She signed the final documents via DocuSign without ever returning to the property. On the day before the official closing, Marcus packed up the last of his belongings. He left furniture. Most of it had been purchased for the house rather than for any specific location in his life. He left behind 12 years of accumulated possessions. The only thing he took was the sledgehammer. As he stood in the empty driveway one final time, looking at the house that was no longer his, Marcus thought about the camera he'd destroyed. The footage that had been so carefully documented and then so thoroughly deleted. There was nothing left of his surveillance now, no record of the evidence he'd compiled, no documentation of Corinne's trespass, no database of the neighborhood's transgression against his boundary. All gone. He'd spent months building a case against Corinne Henderson. In the end, she'd destroyed herself without his help. The faulty survey had been waiting in the city records all along, just a time bomb set long before he'd even thought to install a camera. Justice had arrived, but not through any action of his own. It had arrived almost accidentally, a side effect of her own desperation and poor planning. Which made Marcus wonder, had any of it been necessary? Would she have been caught anyway, regardless of his surveillance? Would the truth have emerged regardless of his obsession? He would never know. Corinne and Derek and their children stayed in the neighborhood. The foundation problems were addressed, more slowly than anyone would have liked, as they negotiated with contractors about liability and repair timelines. The expansion remained incomplete and ultimately was abandoned. Derek found work with a different real estate agency. Corinne stepped down as HOA president due to personal reasons, and became less visible in the neighborhood. Emma continued her competitive swimming. Tyler got a better handle on his behavioral issues after seeing a therapist. They resumed a normal life, a life that did not include Marcus Mitchell, which was, in the end, all that Marcus had ever really wanted. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the day Karen had first entered his pool, Marcus found himself in a coffee shop 3 hours' drive away from the neighborhood. He'd taken a new job with a different architectural firm in a different city. He was living in an apartment, something temporary and rented, the kind of place where you didn't worry about maintaining the landscaping or protecting the boundaries of your own property. He was drinking coffee with a woman he'd met through a friend. Her name was Sarah, and she worked in urban planning. She was talking about a restoration project in the downtown area, an old warehouse being converted into residential lofts. Marcus was listening, actually listening, for the first time in over a year. Not because he was monitoring for threat or deception, but because he was genuinely interested in what she was saying. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Sarah asked at one point. "Building things that other people will live in?" "Sometimes," Marcus said. "I used to get attached to things I built, used to feel like I needed to protect them. But I'm learning that everything you build is eventually going to be inhabited by someone else, used in ways you didn't anticipate, changed and adapted and lived in. And that's okay. That's actually the point." Sarah smiled. "That's very zen. Are you always this philosophical?" "No," Marcus said. "I used to be someone who needed control over everything, my property, my boundaries, my possessions. It didn't end well." He didn't tell her the story. He didn't see any reason to. That story belonged to a version of himself that no longer existed, or at least, not the version of himself that was sitting in this coffee shop, interested in what a woman was saying about urban restoration and community planning. The coffee shop was busy. People were coming and going, minding their own business, not monitoring anyone, not being monitored. It was just a normal Thursday afternoon, in a normal city, with normal people living normal lives. Marcus paid for both coffees and asked Sarah if she wanted to get dinner sometime. She said yes. And if there was some residual part of him that noticed the security camera mounted in the corner of the coffee shop, the one with its small red light blinking with the steady pulse of continuous recording, he chose not to think about it. Some observations, some recordings, some documentations of the world passing by, they could exist without commentary, without analysis, without obsession. The eye could see without needing to control what it saw. The camera could record without demanding judgment of everything it captured. And a person could move through the world without trying to own every moment of it. It was a lesson that had cost Marcus everything to learn. But standing in the sunshine with Sarah, planning dinner and making plans to see each other again, he thought it might have been worth the price.